actually have to establish shared humanity, because prospering is a human right, but we won't get to that if we cannot see each other in our humanity and bear witness to that and work collectively to a strong sense of loving shared humanity.
Hi, I'm Danielle DeLeo Kim, Executive Director of Philadelphia 250. In 2026, the country will commemorate the 250th anniversary of American independence. So I invite you to listen in and get inspired to take action as Philadelphia 250 brings together thought leaders and change makers to share what those founding promises mean to them now and in the pursuit to 2026.
Hi, I'm Ronnie Polineski. I'm the editor of The Upside, which is the good news, good stories section of the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Hi, this is Mike O'Brien. I am Director of Learning at the Village of Arts and Humanities, Innovation Fellow at Drexel University's Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation, and I'm the founder of a consultancy called Human Nature.
Hi, I'm Carla Ballard, and I am CEO and co-founder of a company called Ying.
For the communities that you serve, do they know that the Declaration of Independence was written for them? And how might you, and if they don't think that, if it doesn't even occur to them, how might you begin to let them know that those words are their words? Those are for them.
I think we have to be honest when we're asking that question, right? And what I mean by that is there's an assumption there, right? That the founders were even thinking of those that they were raping, that they were hanging, that they were stealing from, that they were breaking the families up from. So I don't think, Ronnie, that they were intentional about the people that they were shipping from Africa, right, over to this country, or the indigenous population that they were, not being honest and respectful to at all. I think we have to ask the question differently. I think we have to take an opportunity now to begin to decide what are those founding principles that we'd like to possibly tweak, reinterpret, reframe, bring forward new ones. I am talking with Chief Phil Lane, who is a Dakota, and it's been beautiful. And he shared with me recently the 16 guiding principles that many tribes have come together to really bring forth. And I look forward to really supporting these principles in the work that I'm going to be going on furthering doing. But it is important that we look at that question, I think, differently. And we have to come from a frame of reference that they weren't made for, many, many people here.
If I could say, that, I think maybe I need to, I think maybe I need to restate the question.
Okay.
I feel like it's time for people to reclaim the Declaration, because I think those words, even if the men who wrote them didn't quite have today's people in mind, too late, dudes, you wrote them. And those are some amazing words. So now, is this country going to stand on those words, or are we going to stand on the hypocrisy of many of the men who wrote them? If we're going to stand on the words, then those words belong to all of us. And if there was hypocrisy behind writing them, well, I guess there's some reckoning there, So I guess the question, maybe the question is there talk about reclaiming those words and saying, no matter what those men thought or did, they wrote those words, and those words are pretty powerful. And if you strip away everything we know about those men, those words can stand. I think maybe
Mike,
that's something.
I know you want to say something. I'll
let
you say something. But let me say this real quick. I think, and it was great because I got to read those words, right? And I do agree with you, Ronnie. They are powerful words, and they transcend, right, the spirits at that time that were writing them. And so I absolutely subscribe to those words. I do. And I represent Indigenous, I represent the colonizer, I represent those that were taken from Africa. I am an interracial type of being. And so I subscribe fully to those words, especially as someone that has been born and raised here, and especially in the city of Philadelphia. And at the same time, I recognize for many, 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 it's so hard to even acknowledge those
Sure.
words, right? Because of the atrocities that were done. With that said, there is a point in our time of being on this earth with each other and communing with each other that we have to move forward and we have to work on healing. And we have these words that were given to us right now and for today, that the society that we're living in, that we're breathing in, that we're building communities and businesses in, these are the words we have, right? So whether we like them or not, or want to change them, this is what we have. And I do think Philadelphia 250 especially has the ability in 2026, and with these conversations today, for us to start to redefine them, reframe them, and allow them to work for who we want to be in the future.
Right. Okay. Mike?
To your point, while the hypocrisy, of the founders is a glaring thing versus these, they are beautiful words, right? We also have to contend with the fact that all of their descendants decided to continually operationalize and iterate on that hypocrisy. And so the notion of me reclaiming something that my white counterparts have done very little to actually address and reshape so that it is truly inclusive of all these other folks, like I just have no interest in doing that labor right now. I do have interest in figuring out regionally how we can create a shared sense of humanity that allows us to address racism as a public health issue, that allows us to look at the benefits of thinking as inclusivity and equity through the lens of public health and through the lens of population health. There's some unpacking and some
Right.
real work on the hands of those in power with privilege and access before there's reclaiming to happen.
One of the things, Carla, I was thinking about how with your organization, what is so cool about it is that you eliminate any middleman. And I'm thinking about how the middlemen in this country have had a lot of power. The people who hire for companies can decide who gets in. The banker who looks over your applications for loans can decide if you get the loan and therefore you get the car or the house that you need or not. And so your model, it's just people who have something to offer, and what they have to offer is as unique as they are. There's no middleman. They just put out there what they have, and others can respond to that worth. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
I'm happy that you brought it up because, working in communities such as Anacostia in Washington, D.C., here in Philadelphia, we often hear about there being an absolute disconnect of not just timeframes of when services are available, but also, to your point, a lot of own internal biases within the social sector, social impact sector, that people just wouldn't even recognize or realize. And so we have intentionality around creating a space and place where both organizations and individuals can identify the skills they would like to offer, certainly identifying the time that they would like to give as well, and create a very much Venmo, Uber, TaskRabbit on-demand platform that allows for those needs to get surfaced via task request and sent out to either an organization on the platform or an individual, somebody that is in your trusted circle. And that model, I think, is very key now more than ever, because a lot of nonprofits are struggling with how to survive themselves. And so this is not to necessarily go out and cut off the incredible good work that nonprofits are doing. This is also to put
Sure.
nonprofits in a position, right, to help to and receive the type of resources. But yeah, it's a disruptive model, and I'm excited to see how we can get more things done without feeling the pressure and the challenges behind those biases, and frankly, behind the financial liquidity, challenge that many organizations and individuals are facing.
And it occurs to me that one of the results is you build relationship. I mean, it almost seems at the, maybe even the underpinnings of the entire declaration is about relationship. You know, who are we in relationship to this country that was being founded, and in relationship to the people in whose hands we put our expectations and our hopes. And certainly with your organization, relationships get built. And the same thing is, with the Village of the Arts and Humanities, Mike. I mean, beyond the policies, which, I mean, of course, that's everything. But can you talk a little bit about what happens when actual relationships get built? Like, what does that do to the vibe? And what does it do to the vibe of your organization when you can see relationships coming together where there hadn't been those before?
Creativity can open up when you have new relationships, or you're refortifying and deepening the relationships between people who are already in, connection with one another. And, it's interesting because in the 21st century, as technology and automation and augmented reality, VR, all the things are happening, and jobs were precarious before COVID. And COVID has just made this even worse. You find this space of like, and a lot of my research focuses on, well, what skill sets are advantageous to the 21st century? I've been basing this work both out of the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation and the Village of Arts and Humanities and my own practice, because I've been on this deep dive before linking to those two institutions, the Village and Lindy, and being able to link the work and research that I was doing on my own to these institutions to have an academic and theoretical home, and then to have a practice-based home is super exciting, because the way that I'm able to take what I've been learning and discovering and these new questions that emerge for me in that process, the way I'm able to take that and situate that in these connected ways with people who would not normally talk to each other, people who would not normally engage each other, or even if they did, they're not engaging each other on these subjects and not with this information at hand. So back to Carla's point around like the economic benefit, I find in these relationships between not just in the community, but outside of the neighborhood, right? Like, and stitching relationships together that can support the well-being of the neighborhood, because we're in a metropolitan area. There's no one part of the city that is wholly taking care of itself solely. That's not true. That's not political economy. That's not policy. That's not the way this works.
So Carla and Michael, you both work with Philadelphia communities, some of which are pretty vulnerable. And it just makes me wonder, what are your hopes for them about the programs and the platforms that you're providing? What are your hopes for them as regards social change? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So when you ask that question, my hope is to have exactly what took place on Saturday, where we brought a group of over 50 Philadelphians from all aspects of the city. And we met with one in particular young woman who was needing to talk with us as the villaging leaders of the group. And it was unbelievable, because she said, the reason why I continue to come to these cohorts, even if they're online, is because I was homeless last week. And this encourages me to move on. In fact, when you all provide 30 minutes of healthcare of mental health in the beginning, I actually look forward to that, because I didn't know where to access or feel comfortable to access mental health services. So I'm actually part of the cohort seeing value in what you all are providing during this transition that we're in with the pandemic. And so the fact that she just took the time to be super vulnerable with us about that reality for her literally broke me down. I mean, I was in tears. And this is why we're doing what we're doing, because literally every day we have individuals being faced with these types of challenges, and we have to provide platforms that allow for people, one, to connect to community, and then also to connect with resources to address the things that they're challenged with.
One of the biggest barriers for people is hope. and not feeling hopeful. But they've got to be able to access things that are tangible that show that it's just not a pipe dream, you know? So it sounds like what
Right.
you're referring to is a kind of hope. And Michael, I'm sorry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no worries. To me, it's fascinating. It reminds me of the term at risk. And I think it's important that when we use those frames in relationship to human beings, that we qualify what we mean when we say vulnerable, what we mean when we say at risk of what, right? And so a lot of the groups that I work with, while they might be vulnerable to X or Y and at risk of, A or B, they're also very resilient. They have assets, they have strengths. But the framing in the philanthropic world, the framing in the social services and social impact world actually tees them up to be viewed as deficits. And I think when we view a human being as a deficit, we get into problems, we get into challenges when it comes time to imagine solutions on their behalf, whether it's a policy, an intervention, a budget line item, et cetera. It gets hard to think about them in the fullness of their humanity and then uh, design programming, interventions, co-design even programming and intervention with them, right? Because if someone's a detriment or they are the source of the problem, then you don't really often want to incorporate them into the design of any kind of mechanism that is supposed to benefit them or do them well, because again, they're part of, right, what the root issue is. And I think that in the context of my work, the context of a lot of work that I happen to be really fortunate to be involved in across multiple sectors, um, from research to on the ground practice to arts and culture to philanthropy, um, and working in spaces around the future of work and workforce development, public and private relationships. Um, I'm fortunate to be able to center the conversation and the work back on our humanity and this concept of our shared humanity. In order to create that as a reality, as a prerequisite, we actually have to establish shared humanity, because prospering is a human right. But we won't get to that if we cannot see each other in our humanity and bear witness to that and work collectively to a strong sense of loving shared humanity. So I appreciate shared prosperity for all it implies about the work of shared humanity.
And you're right, the only way to keep that part neutral and to keep that part focused on the humanity that we all share is to keep looking at the policies that say people need housing, people need healthcare, people need fair access to great education. And you're right, if we call them at risk or vulnerable, I think that's when eyes glaze over. And I think our eyes glaze over when we don't see the humanity of other people. I mean, because then we're talking about something else, you know? So, and this idea that shared prosperity has got to be an outcome of shared humanity. And what I think is so interesting is how you and Carla both were talking about even redefining shared prosperity as our shared humanity. Because without that lens, what are we doing?
If we can recognize that shared humanity, we can begin then to begin to see ourselves as equal. Just because we are human, we are equal. And once we can really begin with understanding that truth, we can begin then to start looking at the other areas that we have to bring that framework of reference into. And shared prosperity is one of them. And that's what I think you were alluding to, Ronnie, that now with the programs that we bring forward as solutions for some of the most challenging things that we've been facing because of racism, because of sexism, really begins to have a different type of resolution, because we can now start to look at where those inequities started and what do we need to make up for them. And that's where it gets sticky. And that's where it's going to not be the easiest, body of work to unwind the policies that have been, systematically creating these challenges for decades and generations upon generations. But the work has to start now. And I think what Philadelphia 250 is doing is really beginning to give us a platform for these conversations these hard conversations to happen so that we can begin in Philadelphia to start creating new policies, creating programs that allow for those truths to be seen.
The world needs all of us. It needs all that we have to give. It needs our hearts and our imaginations, our curiosity. It needs all of that. And we need to have the right to give that to the world, and the world needs to be there to accept it and to grow from it and grow with us. And that's how you build a world that is the kind of world that I think we would want generations to live in.